Hi everybody, it's Mike Duesberg from Magic Means Business. I was on LinkedIn this morning and I saw an interesting post where someone said, boy, it's really rude. They asked me to give a presentation and right in the middle of it, they all turned their cameras off. That made people feel really bad. And I got to tell you a couple things from the entertainment industry that you can use hopefully when you're making your sales presentations, your business presentations, if you're in this virtual environment, and have a better experience. So the first thing that I think you probably ought to notice is that the virtual environment is not the same as being in the same room and making a presentation, right? Every salesman has realized this. If I send you an email, you don't have to respond to the questions I asked you. If you're on the telephone, you might hang up. And of course, if you're in virtual, one thing you can do is with a simple click, you can leave the room or at least turn your camera off and seem to ignore everybody that's there. That's one of the things that makes virtual harder. And it means that your presentation is going to have to be tighter, it's going to have to be designed differently, and it's going to have to be prepared differently than what you would do in a face-to-face environment to make sure that people don't just leave, because it's so easy for them to do it. I mean, we've been in this video now for 30 seconds, and it's very likely that about 80% of the people watching it have already gotten bored and decided to watch something else. Now, having said that, there's a couple other things to remember. First of all, most of the reasons that people turn their cameras off have nothing to do with you, right? If you're in a Zoom meeting, there's always that little confidence monitor in the bottom corner that says, here's what you look like, Bob. And you sit there and you just go, I don't want to look like that. And I don't want to look at that. And I don't want to see pictures of me talking or pictures of me listening. So they just turn the camera off if they're not participating in the event. It makes them more comfortable. Good. Great idea. Stop mind reading and assuming that everybody hates you just because they turned it off. It could be they just don't want to. And I think it's really important to notice that people feel uncomfortable when other people are scrolling the gallery or looking at, what else is going on and who are the other people in this meeting and what does their living room furniture look like. People have gotten very self-conscious about that. So if they're not actively engaged in your presentation, they're not really participating in it, it's more likely that they'll just turn the camera off because it makes them more comfortable. Again, that's that no mind reading rule. Don't assume that people are being rude. They're just making themselves feel more comfortable. And one thing in the performance of the world, as a professional performer, is I've realized that a lot of people do things that make themselves comfortable more than they do things that make other people comfortable, especially if that person is making a presentation. Now, of course, the other rule that we always have whenever we talk about presentation is that the audience only does what I tell them to. They only look at what I tell them to. So the biggest thing you can do, if it's important to you that these cameras stay on, and let's be honest with each other, part of the reality of this new virtual environment is that you're going to spend a lot of time talking to a camera. That unblinking eye that just doesn't really respond, it just watches you and records you. You got to get comfortable with that, right? You're not always going to get feedback. But if you're in a presentation situation and you want to get feedback, here's some things you can do. First of all, just tell people you want them to keep the cameras on. I think one of the great opening lines that I've heard is, look, this is not a presentation, it's a conversation. I'm going to ask you questions, you're going to have questions for me. Make sure that you keep your camera on and be ready to turn on your microphone so that we can talk during this. Now that probably means you're going to have to restructure your presentation so you actually ask people questions, especially if you were planning on showing them your spreadsheets and your charts and your images rather than actually asking them questions and getting things started. That's a change, but it's going to make you a stronger performer and a stronger presenter in virtual than you would necessarily have to be if you had the luxury of actually being on stage. Second, I love to get things that are interactive, and I like to do interactive jokes with people. In fact, one of the things that I've seen people say, and I use this myself in my show now, is to say, look, I appreciate that I can't hear you applauding. I mean, you're clapping like this in your screen, I can see that. Tell you what, if you see something you like, if you're going to clap, do this. This is the sign language signal for applause, right? And it's kind of cheesy, but I have to admit, for a magician or for an entertainer, this is really helpful stuff because now people say, look, I got to leave my camera on so that Mike can see me clapping. Mike can see me enjoying the show. And I actually talk to them. I say, hey, look, I can see people are doing that. And I make a lot of jokes during my show about this, but it works and it keeps them engaged and it keeps the cameras on. You know, at the same time too, be ready to ask people questions. Be ready to ask them to do things. Ready to ask them to hold things up so that everyone can see it on camera. If you want the camera on, you have to put people in a position where they need to keep that camera on. So 3 takeaways from this. 1, people only do what you ask them to. So if you want them to keep the camera on, tell them to and give them a reason to do it. Second of all, no mind reading. I think this is really important. Whenever you see someone do something that you take offense to, the first thing you should always do is say, look, I don't know that that's why they did that. Right? If you feel the need to ask a question because you need to clarify it, do it. But don't ever assume that someone's being rude to you. That idea of a microaggression will do more harm to you than the thing that that person ever actually did. Because it'll sit in your head and it'll drive you nuts and it'll make you nervous and it'll make you say things that probably aren't true. So never mind read. The only mind reading that ever happens in the Magic Means business world is the stuff that happens on stage, and that's a trick. I hope I see you guys again soon on one of our videos. Have a great day.